and welcome you all once again to the National Poetry Month kickoff. We have three wonderful poets here today that I'm going to introduce now. Brynn Saito is the author of 2 books of poetry and co-founder of the Yonsei Memory Project. YMP uses art and storytelling to connect the World War II era incarceration of the Japanese American community with current struggles for justice. Her poetry has been nominated for a Northern California Book Award, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, Vogue, and American Poetry Review. Currently, Brynn is an assistant professor of creative writing and English at California State University, Fresno. Marcelo Hernandez Castillo's most recent book is Children of the Land, a memoir from HarperCollins. He is also the author of Sinzotle, winner of the A. Poulan Jr. Prize, BOA Editions 2018, and Dolce, winner of the Drinking Gourd Prize, Northwestern University Press. As one of the founders of the Undocu Poets campaign, he was the first undocumented student to graduate from the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan. He lives in Northern California, where he serves as visiting assistant professor at St. Mary's College and teaches for the Ashland University Low-Res MFA program. Tess Taylor is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including The Misremembered World, selected by Evan Boland for the Poetry Society of America's inaugural Chapbook Fellowship, and The Forage House, called Stunning by the San Francisco Chronicle. Work and Days was named one of the New York Times Best Books of Poetry of 2016. In spring 2020, she published 2 books of poems. Last West was commissioned by the Museum of Modern Art as part of the Dorothea Lange Words and Pictures exhibition. Rift Zone from Red Hen Press was hailed as brilliant in the LA Times and named one of the best books of 2020 by the Boston Globe. She is currently on the faculty of Ashland University's Low-Res MFA Creative Writing program. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and let Brynn take it away from here.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you to Napa Bookmine and all of you for being here this evening. I want to also thank Marcelo and Tess. It's wonderful to be in a space with you all. And as Tess will talk about later, the 3 of us were supposed to read together in New York City around this time last year, and that didn't happen. So this is the first time we have a chance to kind of connect and be together. And, Tess gathered us sort of, after Last West came out, this book that's in conversation with Dorothea Lange's work. And Tess and I have had many conversations over the years about Lange, and especially about Lange's role in documenting the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, those really famous photographs. In our community, she's well regarded because she attempted to really show honestly what was happening in the camps. So tonight, sort of in honor of Lange's work and Tess's work as well, and the way the 3 of us are connected, I thought I'd read maybe 2 pieces that are related to my writing sort of obsessions over the last few years. I've been doing a lot of exploring of my own family's history in the prison camps. My grandparents met in the Gila River incarceration camp in Arizona. They were about 22 years old when they got sent to those camps and imprisoned during World War II. And my auntie was born in the camps. And my father and I recently took a pilgrimage to Gila River together right before the world sort of shut down. We were able to travel together to Gila, which is located on the Gila River Indian Community's sovereign territory. They call it sort of a prison on top of a prison. So it's always complex, right, layers of these community histories. So my dad and I traveled there, and a lot of my recent writing has been reflecting on that pilgrimage we took, what it was like for the 2 of us to be in that space in the desert together, and to see the foundations of the barracks, right? The concrete foundations are still there 75, almost 80 years later. So these 2 pieces sort of are about that pilgrimage and about that landscape. This first one is a letter, it's a prose piece, a letter to my father that I wrote when we came back to California And this letter exchange actually evolved into a whole letter project. And I'll put the link in the chat in a bit. But Tess is included in this letter project. There's a series of correspondences I've had with my family and with writers and artists sort of about that moment in the Japanese American community and how it relates to, all of these patterns of detainment and oppression that we constantly sort of see in this country. Okay, so I'm going to start with this letter. And it's just called Dad. There's a new way I see the garden now, the one you've been tending for decades on Garden Avenue, of all names, the street of our family home. In haiku, written by former camp prisoners, days and seasons are tracked by the falling leaves of the moss rose, petal to earth. Poets in camp numbered months and years by the memory of their home gardens left behind on the West Coast, flowering rhododendrons and peony buds imagined as remaining firm. I think of us traveling that week in the summer of 2019, away from California, along the train's course, through Arizona and on to Gila River. How far I brought you from your garden. Did you think of the sagos, the summer tomatoes and basil, the azaleas and red maples, the night blooming lantana, trees needing trimming, grass going brown, all of the work awaiting you? Did you imagine the dogs chirping and the silent white bucket and mom dragging the hose across the lawn to wake the fountain? Here in the Southwest, I find myself pining for the great Central Valley, as I did when I lived in New York, or that decade by the bay, exhausted from cold bridges and colder waters, longing with my entire body for the landscapes of childhood's kingdom, smog dust and all. I understand now I am nothing. I am the daughter of a living father, blessed to be returning to you after our fire and ice travels through North American landscapes, spotted by our elders' lives, their prison desert homes, and other jails and prisons, with and without bars or barbed wire. You were not taken. In the night and shirtless, you were not captured or broken by the century's light despite my nightmares. You took your time in the summer garden, where Lee and I played as the light set, basiling our bodies against mosquitoes, baking mud sweets in California's sugary dusk. Dad, your voice is wise now, beyond kindness. I'll see you soon. So if you actually go to the website, which houses the letters and the responses, you can see my father's reply, which was amazing. I had a little writing workshop with my family in my community here in Fresno, and it was like pulling teeth. They don't write poetry. They don't want to write. They don't want to share. But I got my parents together and we sat down and I read them my letters and I said, write me a letter back. So if you go to that site, you can see what my father said back to me. And I'm going to read just one more. This is a poem actually that I've never read aloud, but I love I love this group of poets I'm reading with and the kind of intimacy of all of you being here tonight. So I'm going to give it a try. It's called Self-Portrait Disguised as Stones. And it sort of imagines, a lot of my poems have imagined what would the stones have said in those desert landscapes? What did they see? They've been there for hundreds of years. They've watched the barracks go up. They watched them come down. All as a way, I think, for me to just have this hunger to know, like many of us do with our elders and our ancestors, what did they go through? How did they survive? What if I were a stone and could have seen them, could have witnessed their lives? Just the imaginary space of that. So this is sort of a strange lyric poem. There are 4 parts maybe, and this sort of the voices of the stones. Self-portrait disguised as stones. 1, were I there, under eve and uncrushed, set in some dust corner after desert snow? Were I riparian speck, alkaline and present, adventuring redressed, mountain chip, moss rose, what could I speak? I might have soaked secret after secret, seen the spark birthing seed, birthing daughter and sons, their unwired love. I might have drank joy from the blameless, seen the meeting of the gambler and survivor of addicts, two laboring, landless. For years I was restless, amethyst disguised as ash rock, freckled, forgotten, noctilescent daikon. I was afraid of my face. 2. Do you walk through constructed silence, arousing memory? Do you follow the long-limbed beetle around the ancestral mountain, arresting memory of Capricorn and Gemini, of Nebula and Violin, one daughter of Queen's wandering creosote, of Milky Way and Wonder Throne, of swallowtail and milkweed, hardy grass and omen ants gather, birds trill electronic, a cloudless sulfur catches light. Let me down slowly. 3. I was there, I was restless, my mind, a body, my body sweeping life cells in a single direction over Earth's face, see freedom for centuries, a chemical fist unfolding in the fescue. Desire did this, fertile dust and diatom seas, forest lung and red rock a roiling grace. You die. I collapse in the hollow before language, not in your father's throat in Hiroshima, everlasting rock monuments, riding on the crane's wing, folded by the dead one under a future sky. And 4, I'm single stone with dual souls, 2, then 3, handfuls of rock shard under dim, immense heaven. One conflict illuminates the other, our hexagonal suffering in sky time, our moonstone super enemies. I'm talking about the garden now, how it stared down the wolf heart, wan. Roots hold on to each other, uncapsized under summer soil, sheer history, traveling underground arrows. One cross holds the sea dogs at bay, the other archives light. Unbeast me. Pack of dogs, take my palm. Open me to the secret memory. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Maybe should have practiced that last one before I read it aloud, but that's okay. I practiced it now. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Brynn. That was beautiful, beautiful. I was just furiously typing away lines and thoughts. Thank you. So I always love it when I read with somebody and I'm starting to see like echoes with what we chose to read, and it's just happenstance. And as I was figuring it out, it was like before I listened to you, Brynn, but I always like to, I mean, maybe our brains just make those connections either way, but this is kind of a letter to my father as well as a letter to the landscape that I left in returning to my hometown in Mexico, and my first time returning in 21 years. And so it is the scene of me flying in an airplane and looking at the landscape below, and seeing what my family and millions others could not see possibly from the ground. And it opens with a epigraph by Wendy Zhu from her poem / lyric essay Notes for an Opening. And it says, I am trying to dissect the moment of my erasure. I never knew where my grandfather Jesus was buried, only that he's been lying somewhere in the desert of Sonora for the last 60 years. Our family thought he was buried somewhere in a town called Empalme, We are almost sure he got a proper Catholic burial, but there was nothing proper about it. 6 miles above the earth, on a flight returning to the country of my birth with my wife, Ruby, after a 20-year absence, I looked out the window at the desert below to see what my grandfather couldn't see 6 decades before. How, despite its seeming endlessness, the landscape did have limits. It did have an end. From the sky, anything seemed possible. We were in the space between two countries, along that indiscriminate line where perhaps even time was irrelevant. In the sky, I could stand still, something I couldn't normally do back home, something no one in my family was ever able to do. We were traveling from the Midwest to see my father for the first time in 10 years since he was deported. It was 2013, and I thought I was still young enough to want to start things over between us. Lying thousands of feet above the border, I felt fluid. I positioned myself against powers larger than me. On the plane, I wondered if there was an exact point when we were no longer in one country and inside another, or if there was ever a moment when I occupied no country. If ever that was possible, it was possible up in the air. There was no clear correlation between what was happening down below and up above. I had heard that at the official port of entry, there were turnstiles, just like the subway, ushering the travelers forward. If such turnstiles existed, you could map the precise moment when half of your body was here and the other half was there. I could measure. All I wanted was that little gold stamp that said I clicked past onto the other side. I entered. I returned. I was measured, counted for, recorded. Would a sudden coldness come over us when our bodies moved over the actual line of the border? Wasn't that how loneliness began, with the coldness of our bodies? When I developed black and white photos in my high school art class, I erased all the grayness from the resolution because I believed you didn't need gradients to understand an image. I believed in black and white. Even though I deformed the images beyond recognition, people could still see through them and understand them. I wanted someone to look at them and know what they were looking at despite everything I had done. Everything was either light or it was a tree. You were either in one country or you were in another. There was no in between, black and white. I had no patience for gray. There was nothing I could do to stop the plane from charging forward. It felt like we were going too fast. I was afraid I would miss the moment we would officially cross over. The border existed both outside me as well as within. I smiled at the flight attendant who smiled back. I ate my Biscoff. I pressed my face to the window. When I came undocumented to the US, I crossed into a threshold of invisibility. Every act of living became an act of trying to remain visible. I was negotiating a simultaneous absence and presence that was begun by the act of my displacement. I am trying to dissect the moment of my erasure. I tried to remain seen for those whom I desired to be seen by, and I wanted to be invisible to everyone else. Or maybe I was trying to control who remembered me and who forgot me. But I couldn't control what someone else saw in me, only persuade them that it was an illusion. There were things that I could not hide, things that would come out of me and expose me in my most vulnerable moments. I was afraid of the way I walked. It was easy to imagine being hit by a car, because even if they didn't see me, I would for once be able to feel my body as more than smoke. And I did get hit by a car in high school, actually. I started to become undone, like a loosely coiled ball of yarn that was bound to come apart eventually. I felt like neither the US nor Mexico wanted me, and that I was between two opposing magnets, and one was pushing harder than the other, my chest heavy beneath their weight. The US was winning. How appropriate it would have been to die 6 miles in the sky with Ruby next to me, no footings on the earth, a citizen of no country. How happy that would have made me. I didn't want to find a home. What I wanted was an origin, which was different than home. To look and see if that origin had a shape or if I could give it one. If I was not welcome in the country of my birth, I would be okay. I was used to that feeling. What I could not withstand was never finding that from which everything of me came from. Up until that point, I had only heard stories, legends, and myths of my family's past and what life was like on that mountain. I wanted something else that felt more real because I didn't trust my imagination enough to fill in the gaps. If only I could have jumped in the air inside the plane until not even my body was touching the plane and hold still there for hours. I wanted nothing to touch me, to know what it felt like to be untethered. I knew that I was supposed to be grateful to be able to go back because only two other siblings had been able to see him, each a few times in the course of 10 years. I knew that there were countless others who would kill for even just a day to be able to come back and see their father. It was a story I knew too well. Be grateful. Ruby held my hand and leaned her head on my shoulder. She had never been to Zacatecas, and even though I was born there, it would be as if we were both seeing everything for the first time. We didn't talk much for the duration of the flight. We just stared at the window, looking at the landscape below. Being in the air, seemingly motionless, made me believe that I would actually attain it, that I would actually feel the moment we stepped over. I needed to go to the place of my mother's birth, the house where she was brought into this world, the ranch of La Loma on that mountain where she played her radio late at night on the roof. Yes, it was selfish to only want to return for my own needs, but I wasn't done with the past. I could already feel the thread starting to unravel. What would be left of me when they all disappeared? It was there in La Loma that I thought I could feel safe enough to uncoil what I had spent years wrapping tight around me. I had hid so much of myself through behaviors foreign to me that I started to think those facades were, in fact, me. My whole life was an act, and it started to feel like a joke. I was a walking one act play. I was tired because I had lost a sense of reality, a sense of who and what I was put on this earth to be. If in that moment at La Loma I became undone, I might be able to replace the center with something, to put something there and begin to wrap and coil myself back together again. Maybe then I would be able to start a new life as myself all over again, the self that stayed behind when we migrated 20 years ago. I was returning to look for a 5-year-old version of me, to tell him to stop, to hold him and tell him that things would be okay. I was going to take back what was stolen from me. My childhood was stolen. I had no memory of it whatsoever. It wasn't my choice to forget. There were things my mind decided were best I didn't remember. Maybe if I touched the places where I and those who came before me and my family were born, then something would come back to me. I couldn't remember being 7 or 9 or 11. If I started the journey again to go to Mexico only to migrate out of Mexico again, maybe it would be like living my life again, moment by moment. Sorry, I lost my place. just checking my time. Um, sorry. Um, yeah, here, sorry. I ventured to believe that the function of the border wasn't only to keep people out. At least that was not its long-term function. Its other purpose was to be visible, to be seen, to be carried in the imaginations of migrants deep into the interior of the country, in the interior of their minds. It was a spectacle meant to be witnessed by the world, and all of its death and violence was and continues to be a form of social control. The way that kings of the past needed to behead only one petty thief in the public square to quell thousands more. The biggest threat to immigrants who succeeded in crossing was the fear that the apparatus was always watching you. It was the idea that was most menacing, that infiltrated every sector of a person's life. Total and complete surveillance. It was the unrelenting fear that was most abrasive on a person's soul. And on the Mexican side of the line, it stood as a symbol for those wanting to cross, announcing, this could happen to you if you dare. We had all seen what happened to bodies in the desert. We knew the dangers of coyotes. I always felt like it was on my back, looming just above me, the omnipresent nature of the beast. The border didn't just exist in the Southwest, but rather everywhere. I had possessed its lesson. I knew that place wasn't somewhere I traveled to or lived in. The border had taught me that it had to be something else. I wanted to exist in that relationship. I wanted to exist I wanted to exist in a place that had no relationship to the border at large, or to immigration, or to my status or my family's. I wanted a tree, a beach, a mountain, even a bird, not tinged the color of all my fake documents. But where could I go that didn't involve a border in one way or another? Where on earth is a border irrelevant? How could I create a small landscape of memories divorced from that spectacle? Maybe this place could be independent acts of love that transcended the limitations of time and memory associated with borders, as in the phrase, I don't remember where we kissed, all I know is that we kissed. Place as memory, place as dissociation. There was no escape, so over the years, I started drinking to create my own spectacle. I knew that it was not simply birds, trees, and dirt down there. There were ghosts, very much as real as the trees around them. There was blood down there that didn't possess the magical ability to dry, to wither away into nothing, to be forgotten. How easy it would have been to look down and see nothing but sand. How fortunate for those who couldn't, or better said, refused to see the bodies strung like sweaters on clotheslines beneath the water in the Rio Bravo. I felt like I'd lost control of my body, like I was already dying 6 miles above the earth. There was death down there, and to some, it hardly made a shadow. It hardly made a sound. To others, it was deafening. It was deafening. It started to sound like hammers.
Amazing, Marcelo, Brynn. So you all, this reading was going to happen at the Museum of Modern Art last March, and it was in celebration for the launch of this book, Last West, where I followed the footsteps of Dorothea Lange through California. And when I had started to do this out of my love for Dorothea Lange, I came very quickly up to the fact that when I was going to the places that Lange photographed, I was going to places where there were migrant labor camps, detention centers, and also going to the Japanese internment camps that she photographed. So I thought of these two friends of mine, these poet friends, Brynn and Marcelo, whose work deals with this, and how in conversation with each other and with Lange, we could do some kind of recovery or look at it from all of our different angles. And Brynn and Marcelo were so generous to me that as I was doing my travels to look at what Lang had photographed, they came with me. I spent a day driving around and saw where Marcelo grew up, and I spent a weekend going with Brynn to Manzanar and talking about our, just looking at it together. And it felt like such a powerful conversation in friendship, and it felt like such a powerful conversation in art. And this book that I made really wouldn't have been the same without them. And so I wanted to have a night, and I'm so excited that it's this night and with this audience, to just read the parts of Last West that have Brynn and Marcelo in them. They made their way into the book. So the premise of the book is Dorothea Lange is this photographer of migrant workers in the 1930s under the New Deal, and photographing on behalf of the Farm Security Administration. And then later, she is assigned to photograph Japanese internment for like a Bureau of War Security, and asked to make it look like nothing bad is happening, which she can't do. So her photographs are confiscated from her, and she doesn't see them until like shortly before she dies. And that's pretty incredible. And she's a chronicler basically of this triumvirate around migrancy, shelterlessness, climate change, and internment. I guess that's 4 things that are happening in California. And if you say those things, every single one of them feels very relevant, not to the 1930s and 40s, but to now. And so my question was, if I go to the places she photographed in California in the 30s and 40s, what will I find? I spent 2 years in the Oakland Museum reading Lange's notes, and I followed her routes around California and drove the same roads. So the poems are collaged between my voice and her voice, the past and the present. And I thought I would just give this a go and read it to you, and read you the parts that are just the beginning to set it up, and a little part with Brynn and a little part with Marcelo, just to thank them so much also for being part of this story, and thank them for being people that were such a joy to collaborate with. So here we are. Last West, Road Songs for Dorothea Lange. She begins, I was young and faced with the question of how I was going to maintain myself on the planet. And of course, there were many things that were going on that I in California was not aware of. Imperial Valley, 1935 and more. Road Songs, her 1935 notebook, Coachella, Calexico, Coachella, Calpatria, Neyland, Holtville, Calexico, El Centro, Brawley, back up 99, Edison, Tulare, Turlock, Modesto, Wesley, La Loma, Marysville, her scrawl, Date Palms near Mecca, a desert method. 1935, single man, you can't find any decent place unless you pay good money. What difference, what country, what state, what agency? Question, what does it mean to photograph home? 1935, families of squatters along a side road, all have house cars, get water at service station. Crops, lettuces, melons, carrots, peas, cantaloupe, potatoes, apricots, peaches, berries, alfalfa, beans, cherries, sugar beets. Man, how you gonna get by on just $2 a day? Cotton, 3 men, 20 cents, half a row, $2 a day. Potatoes, no better. Man, wife, and kid. Onions, 160. Hay job, 25 cents an hour. Imperial Valley, more refugees outside. 1937, man, if we had anything to go back for. 1937, Skid Row, this also is California. 2019, today's paper, climate change affecting coffee groves of Honduras. 1937, man, I wouldn't undertake to farm this land no more. Abandoned houses, abandoned soil, the government camp, the the trading center, Main Street in Marysville, cabins for rent, Graflex #1. Note to self, get wide angle lens. So in the wide angle lens, we're driving, and then we do go to Imperial County, where Dorothea Lange traveled in the 30s and 40s to photograph carrot pickers who were migrants out of Mexico and also out of the Dust Bowl. And literally, when I went to see the fields that she photographed, I found that there was also in the same spot a detention center that holds 782 people. So this is a little bit of that section of looking for the detention center and also looking for the places that she photographed. And you'll hear those same patterns of her words and my words woven together. The first time we drive to the Google address for DHS Imperial Valley, the map leads to a place that doesn't exist, an unmarked building on a dry cul-de-sac. Had to do something, couldn't stay there. We never find out what the address is for, but a former DHS center in Imperial Valley did exist in El Centro. The building resembles a regional post office surrounded by a parking lot. One gate, one fence, faces, of all things, a strip mall dermatologist, which is to say, a public thing, in view of the road. Can't go back there, too much flood. The canals are the same as when she was here. Troughs slosh the long fields. The water, of course, different at the level of atoms because it is river, thus part of the earth. And we camped in the Tule down in the riverbed. She came every year for a lot of the 30s. We wonder if that's because it's confusing to figure out what crop would be ready when. It is so hot, crops come at odd seasons. Our enormous appetite for having all things available. What a hard drive it would have been in 1935, the march of the desert marches back. Now workers pick food from 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. Bodies trail huge machines with lights like alien ships. Sam sees them at 6 a.m. finishing sugar beets. 2019 headline, in immigrant crackdown, more convicts used in farm labor. This is not a quarrel over a little shack. Hard to find people to go into the field, says Eddie. Most of the guys that do it are old now. One street in Brawley, map of street, views of alley, AM, PM, garbage disposal, sewage, people, what they say. The New York Times headline is about the rate at which species are going extinct due to climate change. Even through the canal, barbed wire rolls, border patrol every half mile, trucks at intervals. The all-American canal's moats guarded by the Aztec Fence Company. Approaching by the Calexico back road, we see the canal meet the new river, slats in the water on the other side of the wall, houses, yards, one dog running. The water, a glinting maze. By now, Border Patrol is approaching and I attempt to get back in our car. Someone in a red t-shirt in his back seat. The officer waves again, parks and jumps out, greets me, asks me to stay. Bound for Fresno, bound for Redlands, Riverside, Merced, Winters, Dixon, Capay, Esparto, Madison. The officer, wide-shouldered, mirrored glasses, reflect the big sky, largesse about him, named Javier Sand, not unfriendly, but I should not attempt to cross the canal. We are standing in the last place a person can legally walk in America. Water's 18 feet deep. This is my stretch of border, he says. This land, they say some banker owns it. It's okay you're here. I understand you're interested, but I got a job to do. If you come to look, let us know you're coming. Let us know. We wouldn't want you hurt. Little nod. I got a guy here, fished him out this morning. He almost drowned. We lose a lot of guys this way. I saved his life. Them was his very words. You can walk on this side, but don't cross over. I'll tell everyone that you're looking. Beyond here, I don't guarantee your safety. We don't want you getting hurt. You hear, we don't want you getting hurt. Abandoned ranch house on the valley floor. I feel the great privilege of being so thoroughly warned. We still cannot find the new INS detention facility. Then we realize we've passed it repeatedly along the back road to Holtville. Distracted by the innards of one cracking trailer, we missed the unmarked road. Above the facility, the flag of California, the flag of the United States, a blue flag that says MTC, a leader in social impact. I remember it like it was yesterday, crossing that river. There's danger in large numbers. Border Patrol vans at the side, gated drive, tinted windows. The vehicle disappears inside. In the heat, even the air seems to glitter. I had forgotten that such guarding is privatized. Later, Marcelo tells me that he was afraid to approach. It's a long section. I'm gonna just skip ahead to when I go with Brynn to Manzanar. September 23rd. Hot gold, the low road on the valley's hem, subdivision, farmland, heat and stalled trains. Below hills with black burn marks, late peaches, tired limbs. Manteca, Little League, big dreams. Billboard, Aspire, real American homes. Barn roof says chew top hat pouch tobacco, says capital for sale. Exit, Strawberries State Prison unbuilt cul-de-sac. Like crooked high rises, stacked grape crates gleam. In low sun, we keep driving. Dusk falls and they dim. Manzanar, 1942. Barrack toilets, college students, arrival, interior, music, church group singing, nursery school, Barrack 3, early morning, meal 5 p.m., baseball game, choir practice, picnic tonight. Ideals of citizenship class and boys registering, pots and plants beautifully tended, Swiss chard onion, cucumber snapdragons, sweet peas, whole radish red, soybeans, carrots, Chinese cabbage, sugar beets, tomatoes. Fukuoka Franklin, 3 sons in Navy, all born New York. Hayanokashi, chemist. Sam Hari, gardener. Jerry Yokomizo, hybridizer. William Katsuki, landscape gardener. Peter Hozo, young scientist. Akahashi Ted, wholesale market, produce shipper. Yushika Ukita, 4 American born children. Kazuma Nagai. Carl Yoneda blank. Elaine Yoneda blank. Hot, troubled by sand, dust, and wind. Dear Dorothea, the town nearest Manzanar is still called Independence. One spangled desert night, we slept beside the Inyo County Courthouse and woke to mineral mountains, goldenrod, and rabbit brush. Burnished creosote rusts away for miles. White stones mark the barracks where people lived for years on end. I see my ghosts more clearly now, said Brynn. Overheard, the way my grandfather tells it, there were never enough beds. On Paiute land, this list, Amache, Topaz, Heart Mountain, Gila River, Poston, Manzanar, Tule Lake. The majority in assembly and war relocation centers were under 18 years of age. In their preschool, children napped on cardboard. Mesquite claws the sky, crickets scatter. In one drained pond, a lizard runs. Green moons on a vast sky, the now bitter pears of the old orchard ripen. At the soul consoling tower, cranes rattle in the wind. Cement roads shatter at the border where interpretation ends. Thank you.
So I think now if anybody has any questions or wants to say anything, we've got about 10 minutes or so for questions before we'll do a last final reading from all three authors. So feel free, you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat box and I will do that for you. And don't be shy, we're all friends here. Who's going to be the brave first?
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
All right. Yeah, sorry for logging in through the phone and everything, but so yeah, first of all, thank you everyone, all three of you, for your wonderful, wonderful work and really, really powerful work. As I was listening, I was really thinking about kind of the echoes of like history throughout, kind of like the ties between like, well, I guess I should get to my question. So like in crafting this project, like what were some things that were brought more into focus, that are still some continuities that are still that are still like problematic or making things that are really difficult for people in marginalized communities in particular?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, sorry, Ty. Yeah, I think I'm asking you in particular.
I mean, there was a chance because of the lens of this work to think about things that maybe we don't always think about in their relationship to each other. So the relationship of the past of who California has been and how it's become where it is now. So for instance, when you accept the fact that internment, that internment is a huge part of our history, and also that those camps were holding basically a majority of children and people underage, the country that we've become, and that's 85 years ago, the country that we become has a continuity, right? There's a continuity with some of that stuff. And then literally the places would present these, this layering to me, that literally these fields where these people she photographed in the 30s were picking carrots are literally being used now for this detention center, or the land next to them. So there was a way in which you could see the way that the country had accreted itself. But I also think there's a relationship between the fact that we have this enormous population of people that are shelterless in one way because they're lacking what we call home. And then there's this other sort of problem or issue around migration, which is also a problem of moving from home. And they're not the same problem, but it's really interesting because they're both in her work. In her work, they share a regard and a relationship that is that felt really poignant to me. Not because those are the same problems, but because it's all that, but you could feel the relationships between them. So that line where it says more convicts used in farm labor, this idea of somehow this labor needing to be done, people moving to do it, the question of how those people are going to be housed, and then the question that we're having now of like people in the cities, how are they going to be housed? I didn't nail it down like an economic argument, but it was more like really productive proximity. And also just getting to spend time. I spent a lot of time at one camp in Berkeley, and really got to know people and got to know their sense of what they would like. And this was a camp for shelterless people without homes, how they would like to be treated, what they would like, what interventions would be meaningful to them, how they understood what had happened. Just feeling the richness of those stories in particular. That was one of the hardest things when the pandemic hit for me, was that I had this relationship with this community and I didn't feel like I could go hang out or be safe in that way anymore because my husband is immunocompromised. And so, but there was just a feeling of like building relationship in the world that felt meaningful to me.
Thank you, Tess. Any other questions or comments from anyone before we get a last reading from the authors?
Thank you for coming tonight, everybody. And thank you, Brynn and Marcelo. Like, I miss you so much. I wish we were gonna have this thing in New York, and I knew I was gonna like get them for dinner and a glass of wine afterwards, and we'd all be talking and talking. But really, their voices mean so much in my head, and the conversation between us was very, very meaningful to me.
Okay, well, if nobody has anything, I guess if you guys want to take it away again.
Should we go on the order? I'm happy to start again. And Tess, thank you. I mean, I feel like really emotionally moved by both of your readings. I just feel the resonances of our different stories kind of coming together, and questions that you're both asking. Marcelo, thinking of that word spectacle now, spectacle and origin versus home. And Tess, just the multivocality, just the way you were sort of, I just felt really seen. I don't know, like there was a sense of being really seen by you as a chronicler and a poet, bringing this all into the book and then having it be published by the MoMA. I mean, the Japanese American incarceration story still isn't that well known. You know, it's very unfortunate. So this work of making just all these histories visible, just so powerful. So I'm going to read a huzzle that Tracy Brimhall and I wrote. And this was something we wrote during the pandemic. And the huzzle has a common word. So every other line, you'll hear this word shelter repeated. We use that as our common refrain throughout. So we were writing these pandemic poems and using words like shelter and touch and screen as our words to play with as poets. So I'm just going to close with this short huzzle. Huzzle that tries to hold still. Morning rises like an obelisk. Where does stone find shelter? The girl I remember plays in her father's garden, a shelter. Clouds opal the morning, bees make flocks tremble, sparrows sing in me as if I were a red bud, as if my arms were shelter. The ash trees and orange blossoms stand still in the midday sun. Without you, I feel closer to my body's pain. Absence shelters. Wet nose of my arm on my arm wakes me the dog's metronome of joy. Only yesterday, the howl chorus of the shelter. Have you forgotten the magma churning at the earth's core, the animal in us? Rain wakes the sweet bays, the sky shelters. Early evening, the sun in its thin gray veil. Dog asleep on the sofa, all bellies full. My mind's skull bone, an uncracked shelter. Thank you.
Thank you, Brynn. That's beautiful. I'll just read this poem. It's called Condition. Because I'm thinking of the women in my life and the women who have immigrated. Condition. She called the cops, but it was too late. If she opened the door, if she looked through the window, the TV with its jokes and the baby crying on the floor uncontrollably. She didn't look. She collected the reward and bought a gun. She loaded the gun and fixed the man in the story, but it wasn't the same. So she broke her promise again and returned the gun, but the store wouldn't take it back because they tested it out back and said it was still capable of measure. She bought another gun, and the clerk smiled as if she were buying roses, which she was, and she said it was special. It was real special. She went home and gave him the roses, but it wasn't the same. The clock stopped working, and the cops returned with their dogs, but they wouldn't believe her. They said it'd be a shame, you know, a real shame. She said, please, but they could no longer point.
Thank you so much for being here, you all. I'm really nourished by this. Really, of all the things that got canceled, this was one that I was like, and I still feel like maybe we'll meet in a museum in real space. And thank you for holding this space with us. This is just a little bit near the border and near that place where maybe that Javier Sand found me. The New River meets the All-American Canal. If in apricot sage you weave past white, sorry, I'm going to start again. I think I'm just overwhelmed tonight. The New River meets the All-American Canal. If in apricot dust you weave past white sage and climb over pickleweed, you'll pick out a path, some channel for motion, low and half hidden and soft between bushes. And if you push in and head north in the morning, you might find one shoe, a helmet, a toothpaste tube, and riverbank footprints, dog, wildcat, deer, human, some desert morning, light prickling bird song awake. You might startle a duck from the green riverbanks. Dark among willows, the sign says poison, no entrada, and in sagebrush, your cell phone can't say whether you're in the US or Mexico, and in the blue shade under the overpass, many cliff swallows dart from clay homes. In chaparral, beside the slow river, you might walk for a while as the road grows distance, might feel in the silence how you're just walking, might feel for a moment how it's just earth again. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Tess and Marcelo and to Brynn for this wonderful start to National Poetry Month. I hope everybody goes into this evening holding these words in their hearts tonight. And I hope that we'll all be able to be in the same room holding words together sometime soon. Thank you all so much. Everyone has books available at Napa Bookmine for sale. We do ship. Support your local bookstore, support your local poets, support each other. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Mhm.